So I think we can start. And so good afternoon to all of you, everyone who's present here, and a very, very warm welcome. So this lecture is the last and the public part of the two-day seminar, Care is Critical, with Elke Krasny. A very, very warm welcome back to you as well, Elke. And this... I can hear myself now. Oh, okay. Thank you. So, Care is Critical was the title of the seminar with Elke Krasny and the students of the Master of Arts in Public Spheres program here at IDEA. And my name is Petra Köhle, and together with Nicolas Vermont-Petit-Outenin, we are co-heads of this program. And it is my great pleasure to briefly introduce Elke Krasny today. So Elke Krasny is a cultural theorist, an urban researcher, curator, and an author. And in her scholarship, writings, lectures, and her curatorial work, she addresses questions of care with a focus on transformative practices in art, curating, and in urbanism. Her text, Care Feminism, Living with an Infected Planet, has inspired and I would say also encouraged many discussions over the last 2 days. And I'm now looking forward to the lecture Critical Care Architecture. So after this lecture, we will have time to discuss questions. All participants can use the microphones or write your questions into the chat, either here on or on Facebook. We will say this again also afterwards. And I would like to say that this lecture is recorded, so that you're all aware of that. So thank you very much, Elke Krasny, for making the time for us and for creating tools to think and act towards repairing, restoring, recuperating, and healing on this infected planet. Thanks also to Caterina Gian-Siracusa for being a host today, and to Aurélie Stroumans, Federica Martini, and Jean-Paul Felle for their support. And to all of you for making this encounter happen. And with this, I would like to hand over to Elke Krasny, and I'm looking forward to muting my own microphone.
Yeah, a warm welcome from my side. Good afternoon. Thank you, Petra, for inviting me to the seminar, and welcome back to everyone who was part of our discussions, conversations, knowledge production, knowledge sharing over the last 2 days. So there's a group of people here with us who has been in care thinking, in care entanglements for the last 2 days. And of course, I want to welcome all the others who are joining the lecture, which is in a way, maybe not the end, but like put at the end of this conversation for the moment. Before I will share my screen, I will just add a few remarks. What I'm sharing with you is specifically looking at dimensions of care in the built environment at the scale of architecture and urbanism, and based on a research which I did together with Angelika Fitz, who is the director of the Architecture Center in Vienna. And we worked on this curatorial research and the exhibition, but also the book, which we edited end of 2015 until 2019. And I think it's important to stress that, because that was before the outbreak of the global COVID-19 pandemic. So, of course, care hasn't changed, but I think the way in which we think about care, the urgencies around fundamental necessities and what care means in terms of life making and death making and what is at stake has entered into a new kind of global consciousness. So some of the things I'm sharing with you might be looked at differently today from the time we looked at them in the global present in 2016, 17, and 18. So just to explain that maybe accelerated changes around what is considered necessary or relevant are taking place in real time in our current situation. And the other thing I want to stress is that all the examples I'm sharing with you are real examples from the 21st century. They're not utopian and they are not wishful thinking, but they have been tested in the conditions within which they have been produced. And they are of course, none of them is without complications, or if we look at them very critically, we could probably come to a diagnosis of things that could be done better. So I'm not suggesting here these are best case or this is paradigmatically how things have to be done, but they're examples from which we can learn. And now I will go into what I have prepared. Critical Care is the title of the exhibition that Angelika and I worked on, Architecture and Urbanism for a Broken Planet. And the first image I'm sharing with you is an image from 2015 from Paris, Place de la République, where we see a lot of shoes without humans attached to them. And this was at a time when the climate marches were scheduled to take place parallel to the climate summit, but then couldn't take place because of the state of exception and the terrorist attacks that had just taken place in Paris. And nonetheless, people found a way of demonstrating here and showing their being together without being physically present or without putting their bodies out there. And I think now, after months of the pandemic, we read this image differently as a way of marching or demonstrating without being physically present. And so the reason why I very much like this image that at the time in 2015 traveled a lot online and was a very present image, was what we may call a global image, is that even though it seemed that there was no way of acting and that there was no way of having a collective march and of assembly and of demonstration, there was some kind of not yet thought of way of being together by way of putting shoes there. And what I like about this is this maybe coming in sideways or putting forward a solution that is unexpected. And even though we could say this is just on the symbolic level, also the symbolic level can be a powerful level or a level that inspires hope for action. This is the poster that we used for the exhibition, and it says here it was a research project, an exhibition, and a publication. Two terms that were very important to Angelika's and my research and have widely been discussed beyond the fields of geology, natural science, science and technology studies, and have entered into the art world and also into discussions around architecture, are the two terms Anthropocene and Capitalocene that since the last two decades, since the year 2000, have been used to speak about our current era. And Anthropocene is derived from the Greek word anthropos, which means man or a human being, and has been introduced as a new geological period in order to mark humans as a geological force and their disastrous impact on the planet. And there are many theorists and thinkers who have challenged not the fact. So it's not that they are Anthropocene denialists by no means, but they have critically challenged the term Anthropocene, since the responsibility for the state of the planet is very unevenly distributed and very much connected with the system we call capitalism, and therefore they have suggested the term Capitalocene as the clearer term to speak about the human-made environmental damage that we as the global collective inhabiting the planet is currently experiencing, and that dates back to the beginnings of industrialization. Anna Singh is a US Chinese anthropologist who has worked a lot on questions that have to do with living in capitalist ruins. And I'm just smiling because I saw a friend entering our lecture space. I'm sorry. And so Anna Singh has worked extensively on these questions, and she has delivered a lecture in 2016 and then written a paper which is called Earth Stalked by Man. And here again, she doesn't speak about all human beings, but she speaks precisely about Enlightenment man, the concept of superior, the idea of superior humanness that is allowed to dominate nature, to exploit nature and the planet, and to take without giving back if one will. And I'm quoting her here to describe the current conditions of the planet: too rapid climate change, massive extinctions, ocean acidification, slow decaying pollutants, fresh water contamination, critical ecosystem transitions. And the next sentence is one that I have quoted repeatedly because I think it really helps us think and understand about the critical condition of the planet. Industrialization has proved far more deadly to life on Earth than its designers might ever have dreamed. In the seminar today, we talked a lot about is it really relevant to speak about the planet in such a humankind manner, that we speak of a sick planet or a broken planet or a damaged planet. And I think there are many good arguments that we could make against this, and we have to think about them more profoundly and deeper. But I think the questions that were raised in the seminar also helped me think about industrialization as the kind of disease, or as industrialization as causing the state of sickness. So maybe this is not so much to be understood, or has never been meant metaphorical, but has been meant in real terms, what it means that the planet is sick or ailing and needs different restorative and mending approaches. Long-term care maybe would be the best way of talking about that. And also living with the condition of sickness, so that there is no quick techno fixes, as many Anthropocene proponents have suggested. In the introduction to a critical care book, Angelika Fitz and I wrote that dominated by the interests of capital, architecture and urbanism are caught up in the crisis. So when we think about the construction industry and modernization, which is very often equated with urbanization, we of course understand that architecture and urbanism are fully entangled in having produced the current state of the planetary condition. So they are not outside, they are quite engines of this. And therefore, from a perspective of understanding architecture ethically and politically, we thought it was important to think about ways of practicing architecture that can actually help these kind of repair processes. So not saying architecture will save the planet, but to say we should look for types of architecture that do not make things worse, but contribute to both care for humans and care for the environment. So not to pit environmental and human needs against each other, as it is very often described in political terms. A definition of care that was provided by Berenice Fisher and Joan Tronto in 1990 in their essay Toward a Feminist Theory of Caring is very broad and very wide-ranging, all-encompassing. They wrote, on the most general level, we suggest that caring be viewed as a species activity. So they talk here about the human species. That includes everything we, the humans, do to maintain, continue, and repair our world so that we can live in it as well as possible. That world includes our bodies, ourselves, and our environment, all of which we seek to interweave in a complex, life-sustaining web. And we used this quote in order to understand and define architecture as a care practice. So when we look very closely, particularly at the second sentence, which I want to look at first, the bodies and the environment are literally brought together by architecture. So architecture is always part of the environment, and we know that there is this expression of speaking about the built environment. And so we understand that the built environment is part of the larger idea of the environment. But then, of course, architecture provides space, refuge, shelter for human bodies. So architecture is very much between bodies and the environment, and is in this nexus of connecting bodies and the environment, but also protecting bodies from the environment, but also seeking not to ruin the environment in a specific way. I would also like to look at the first part of the definition together with you in order to understand why historically, specifically, the formation of the modern profession of architecture in the 18th century with its orientation towards systematicity and also authorship is maybe very far from what we read here. When we think about architecture, we don't think about maintaining, continuing, and repairing our world. We might commonly think about building new things, about originality, about putting something into the world that previously didn't exist. And so in a way, maybe this modern legacy, and I'm talking about modern here since the 18th century, not only about modern in the sense of the modern style of architecture as defined by Philip Johnson and others. And so when we talk about architecture as a caring practice, it's also about rethinking the position from which architecture is being produced, so that architecture doesn't start from a blank slate or from a terra nullius kind of situation, but that in a way it starts, as Tronto defines care, in the midst of things, from the given, and has to be understood as part of this nexus or continuum, as I said before. And I think this will, for the future, also need reorientations in the way in which architectural education prepares ways of thinking on the level of teaching and working together with students. One of the key terms within care thought and also recent care theorization is of course interdependence, how humans, non-humans, bodies and environments are interdependent, so dependent from each other, and how the relations through which these interdependencies are being defined, created, reshaped, enabled, made possible in political and social terms, but also in terms of buildings and space, is something that Angelika and I focused on when we started researching. And very often, historically, architecture was defined by questions of style. So this was not at the forefront of what we were looking at. So the examples you will see are not unified by one caring style. There is not a mix of stylistic criteria that would then make it possible for us to say, oh, this is what caring architecture looks like. Much rather, we looked at things that are maybe not visible at first glance. Economies behind architecture, ecology, and also questions of labor. We gathered, researched 21 case studies for the 21st century, and they are all from the 21st century also. And I will now take you through the chapters of the exhibition as it was shown at the Architecture Center in Vienna, and is currently on show in Zurich, actually. The first chapter is dedicated to water and land, so we could say the surface of the planet. And we had in the exhibition the keywords you are seeing here also: water scarcity, access to clean water, rising water levels and floods, land speculation, increasing ceiling. So in the seminar, we discussed a lot about scales and addressing scales and thinking care in relation to scales, but also different scales of care. And this, of course, is also very much true at the level of the built environment. We are looking at specific contexts of case studies, but then they are also addressing larger scale questions and problems through these localized buildings or urban interventions. The first example I'm sharing with you is in Bangladesh, was completed in 2012, Gaibandha, Bangladesh, by Kashef Mahbub Chowdhury and his architectural practice Urbana. It's called the Friendship Center. The Friendship Center is an NGO, which is the client here. And this NGO is involved with education and health. has worked in the past with AIDS prevention, but also with people who have suffered from AIDS, and works on providing for education. And in section here, we can see how a lot of the other buildings are on these raised mounds and platforms. And this is what actually this approach avoided. And we can see that very well in the aerial view. So it rests on the surface. It's not on a raised platform that would add a lot of new material, but it actually tries to live with the recurring floods that define the ecosystem around it. And we see all these basins here that actually let the water pass through when there is flooding. So in a way, we could say this architectural example lives with the recurring occurrence of floods, rather than assuming they will go away, or rather than assuming one has to build against them, but to understand how they are an integral part of what we call the built environment. All the materials that were used are local materials, so they, in a way, act differently within the globalized condition of the construction industry. The second example I'm sharing with you from this chapter that deals with water and land is located in San Juan, Puerto Rico, and was completed after a 7-year process of consultation and participation in 2014. And in a way, there is no real image that I can share here with you. I mean, I can share an image where you see the territories, but the actual project is a new law. So what was achieved here was a new law that the entire land on which the informally developed part of the city, which you see in the foreground of the image, has come to be, exists. All this land now belongs legally to the community in perpetuity, so forever. It cannot be turned into individual lots. It cannot be sold. It's taken out of the capitalist economy. And this is what was being achieved here. And when we look at the image, it also tells us why the land on which these informally built houses, with the informal part of the city having grown since the 1930s, is under much pressure at the moment. We see the financial district encroaching. And of course, the closer a financial district comes to a neighborhood, the more the value of the land rises, and land speculation and pressure of gentrification, of selling the land, of letting go of it increase. So here it was a coming together of the municipality who invested labor power, lawyers, anthropologists, social workers, and representatives of the community that had over 700 consultations in a process of a little more over 7 years in order to collectively arrive at this new law. And the second aspect that has to do with, not with land, but with water is the Caño Martin Peña, which you see here. It's an estuarian river, and it's a river that not only because of the hurricanes, but also because of the hurricanes had been in very bad shape, but also a lot of open sewage and dirt, a river in need of ecological repair. And this river has actually been ecologically repaired, but very often the unwanted or socially unwanted undesirable side effects of ecological repair is also gentrification. So land value also increases when the environment, the water quality, the air quality, the conditions for health become better. And again, through this law that I have shared with you earlier, this was being prevented. And the images I'm sharing here with you were sent to us by local activists with whom we were in long distance field research. So it's one of the exhibitions I did where I haven't visited all the case studies. So it was in my curatorial work, it was one of the first times where I didn't travel to all these places. And I think this is also something that in this profession of globalized research, art making, curating is something that we will see how it will change in the future. I think there is something to be learned from the pandemic lessons we are learning now, how this will play out to decrease the amount of travel that is going on. And you will also see, of course, that the types of images that they shared are very different from what we conventionally expect to see in architectural exhibitions. I can't go deeply into that, but part of the community organization are also either collectively organized or cooperatively owned businesses, community gardens, urban farming, but also hotels. And so this project really addresses the levels of economy, ecology, and labor in a very complex, but also very holistic way. The next chapter that I want to share here with you is titled Care for Repair. And here we specifically looked at large-scale modernist legacies, decaying building stock, questions of resource consumption, vacancy, many questions of capital-centric urbanization, and also eviction is one of the problems that is addressed in this chapter. Maybe not in the two examples I'm showing here, but in general. The first example that I'm sharing with you is SESC 24 de Mayo in Sao Paulo, Brazil, in the downtown of Sao Paulo, by Paulo Mendes da Rocha and MMBB architects. It's the building with the rooftop pool. Most of the time when we see buildings with rooftop pools, we would think of architecture for the 1%. So the global elite, the global, the 1% of super rich and rich people who have rooftop pools. I mean, I may be oversimplifying, but it's not an image that we might connect with architecture for the 99% or affordable architecture. And the interesting thing here is that this building that was a 1950s headquarter of a department store has been transformed into one of the CESC institutions. CESC is the association of all the trade and commerce and tourism sector in Brazil, and they have a 1.5% tax for measures of redistribution in existence since 1946. So we could say it's a wealth redistribution mechanism. In Sao Paulo alone, there is like 40 CESCs. And the architecture aficionados and aficionados among you might know CESC Pompeia by Lina Bobardi, another CESC that has written architectural history. And CESCs include sports facilities, educational facilities, health facilities, often also canteens, but also exhibition spaces, theater, cinema. So for people living in Europe, many of the things that they recognize in their welfare state infrastructures, or in what historically welfare states provided for. And I think the question of the relation between the welfare state and care is a large question that we can also, I mean, that Angelika and I didn't really investigate in this exhibition, but that is a question that I find extremely interesting. So here we see this building in section. We see that ramps were being put in that are wheelchair accessible, but there are also elevators. And I should also add that the wonderful rooftop pool is for CESC employees and their families. So it is public to a degree. But what I find really amazing is, so this is one of the few examples that I did visit because I was invited to a conference in Sao Paulo, and so I had the chance to go there. And what I find really amazing is that this building is naturally ventilated, but that it also created a most generous interior public. So very often we think about public space as something that is outside. I think it's also equally important to think about accessibility of public interiors and how they have this kind of, not just accessibility, but what I would like to call porosity, so that they're porous to the neighborhood, to their immediate vicinity, and allow for this porosity for different people, different constituencies, different needs to be provided for, but also different types of uses. The second example, and meanwhile, Lacaton Vassal have also won the Pritzker Prize, like Da Rocha, is the transformation of 530 dwellings in the Cité du Grand Parc in Bordeaux. This is one of the large-scale welfare state modernist housing projects, and the image really explains what they did. They added another layer to the existing building using the exact same industrialized construction technique. So one should also say that Angelika and I, we in that sense are not fundamentalists. So we don't only show buildings made out of clay or of wood or of concrete. It's not about condemning any one material, but looking at projects in their specificity as they respond to the given, to what is there. And here they, Lacaton Vassal together with Truot and Hutin added another layer. This is a very well-known project, has been shown widely in architecture, biennales, exhibitions, has been featured a lot. And what I find truly astounding is that they ensured that the rent would not go up, and also that this buffer that is added here actually made the cost for heating go down, or for air condition, because it's like a climatic buffer. And I often think of this project in pandemic times now, how with so many of us working from home, having a so-called home office, this extra layer of space that at the very beginning may have just appeared as a generous gift with no specific use, may have come in really helpful and useful for people living there as an extra amount of space in these pandemic spatial conditions that we find ourselves in now, which of course had never been planned for here. I just think that this is something that comes to mind when we look at this added space here. The third chapter of the exhibition that I want to share with you is titled Care for Skills. So how the making and building of architecture, the local building, maybe we could also introduce the notion of craft, can actually care for increasing know-how and skill, and allow for people to learn architecture while they make architecture. So not necessarily people who want to become professional architects, but people who want to build their or need to build their own houses and their own architecture. And here we listed questions like recurring disasters. So this is also how the Anthropocene condition is widely being described, that there is a continuous sequence of disasters, catastrophes, crises, so that the so-called new normal is the state of being in a disaster, or pre-disaster, or post-disaster. A complex within the disaster economy is the international aid industry, and we could say that this is very much part of capitalism. So the international aid industry is profiting from disasters, and is also, of course, interlinked with the globalized construction industry. Very often, areas that are hit by disaster lead to climate refugees, to flight and expulsion. One of the other issues addressed in the chapter Care for Skills is that there is also often a structural lack of education and of course widespread discrimination that the projects that we are showcasing here counteract, work against, and work toward building differently with communities. This project, and I'm using the term project a lot here, but project is not necessarily small scale. So in lack of a better term, I use the word project. If someone has a better suggestion in the discussion, I'd be super happy to learn. Because when we speak about projects, very often it's considered small or ephemeral or temporary. I don't want to speak about these architectures as oeuvre, but because that in a way would group them in stylistic terms, I think. But they are very often really large scale. So in the Sindh region in Pakistan, since 2010, after the flood catastrophes, architect Yasmin Lari, together with the Heritage Foundation of Pakistan, which she co-founded many decades ago with her recently deceased husband, has been active, and more than 40,000 of the houses you see here have been constructed via self-building. And what she has set up with a number of different NGOs is ways of teaching, passing on building techniques, building knowledge, and they have named the system Barefoot Entrepreneurs. So how you can learn how to self-build, how you can learn to make bricks and other building materials locally, but also how you can generate an income via teaching. So it's a very interesting model of self-organized system of building, construction knowledge, building knowledge, passing on of knowledge, and an emphasis on empowering women, which is very important to Larry. One of the words she uses very, very often is the word dignity. So she speaks about how architecture can provide dignified conditions for living. I'm going back to the slide I jumped over before. So you saw the structures for the houses, the housing infrastructure, and these structures that are also part of the flood rehabilitation project are here for storing seeds or other valuable things of the community in times of flood with these raised platforms. Yasmin Larry is a promoter of zero carbon architecture, which she very much champions and also teaches across the particularly Southeast Asian, but also Australian context. And what she's currently working on is transforming the stoves for cooking. So transforming them like literally that they are on raised platforms so that people have a more dignified way of being with their stoves when cooking, but also reducing the CO2 output. And also inviting the users, the women who use these stoves to decorate them according to their own creative expression. So I think the allowing for creation as a means of both fulfilling fundamental needs that are fundamentally necessary, and at the same time allowing for joy and creative expression and not prescribing those in architectural terms is a fantastic way in which she works. Maybe I should add that Yasmin Larry started out as a modernist architect. So if some of you saw the SOS Brutalism exhibition in Frankfurt, and then it was also shown in Vienna, you would have seen her work included there. So she didn't start out as a clay and heritage person. She very much started out as a large-scale brutalist modernist. And here we see, so this film we also showed in the exhibition. There's a documentation made by Al Jazeera on her, and we see her sitting here traveling to the Sindh region. She very often goes back in order to understand how the buildings actually work with the environment and with the humans. And this is something that I find extremely relevant to draw the attention to. So how architects can make the time in the conditions of production that define architecture to actually go back and learn from their own buildings, how they perform in terms of caregiving between bodies and the environment, when we think back to the quote by Joan Tronto, which I shared with you at the beginning. The next chapter in our exhibition was titled Care for Production. Inside these conditions that we know are the conditions of the global present, neoliberal capitalism, exploitation, precarization, unemployment, and rural exodus. And the first example I'm sharing here is located in Nairobi, Kenya, ongoing since 2006. So many of these projects that I shared here with you either took a very long time before they achieved a law, as explained in the San Juan case, or they are ongoing. There are things going on over a very long period of time, decades often. And this is one of the huge questions that we find so extremely challenging. So most of the architectural practices that have these long-term engagements, like the Kunkai Design Initiative, have a very mixed economy within their offices. So they would have maybe what we call architecture as usual, and very fast-paced production, very much dictated by capital-centric architectural production, which is not really easy to escape. So the voice and the demands of the market within architecture are brutal. And on the other hand, they create like a diverse or mixed economy within their offices, and then have other long-term engagements, cross-financed, or also other models of financing. And also in many of these projects, there is the power of gifted labor, we can say, volunteered labor, the power of collectivity that contributes to what is being achieved in non-monetarian contributions within monetarian contexts. And of course, the question of time within architecture is always crucial. And making more time without the normal system of billing hours is something that a lot of these practices do. But of course, they have to be able to do so by other means. Here we see that Kunkai Design Initiative collaborated for Kibera public space on many different levels with local school children, with different goals. So cleaning up in terms of ecology, providing safer spaces, particularly toilets, which are also very important for women, and making using toilets safer to prevent sexual attacks and sexual violence, but also making public space a productive space with small shops and markets in order to sell things that are produced locally. So also here there is a very finely woven infrastructure of markets, sanitation infrastructures, education, but also culture that they bring together. The next image is a before and after image. And this is also a before and after image, which I'm sharing here with you. And the building with the colorful tiles is the school building. And second example in this chapter that I'm sharing here with you is called This Is Not a Shirt. Also ongoing for a long time. So next year it will be 10 years in Rudrapur, Bangladesh, by Anna Heringer, who is an architect and closely collaborates with seamstresses, tailors, fashion designers, local communities, and also a large number of NGOs over her period of long-term engagement with Bangladesh, where she has been engaged since her studies. So she's a German architect who studied in Linz, Austria, and she has been working in Bangladesh for a very, very long time. So the practices we show are not fly in, fly out practices or dropping architecture like a sculpture, but very often staying with regions for a long time. And what she did here is not necessarily create a new building, but create using the strategies of architecture and planning to build possibilities to work, to create labor locally. So as we all know, Bangladesh is one of the textile producers, the global factory for textiles, with bad labor conditions, but also very unsafe spaces, as we are aware of. And very often, particularly women, are leaving their families behind in order to work in factories in cities. And so what Heringer set up is a way of producing with textiles locally, but she also, you could say, tried to shift relations between the new and the old, and the global north and the global south. So on one hand, the women who are producing these beautiful textiles, like things we see here, but then also things we see here, are using used saris. So they're working with existing materials that have been used and worn and are ready for reusing, upcycling. And also these products are mostly sold via digital commerce in the global north, and there is no intermediaries. So in a way, it's an intervention into the global textile industry in order to create more dignified conditions of labor, in order to allow for women to not leave their villages and their families behind, but also to empower them in the way they design, create, and learn to not just be the ones who manufacture, but to actually create. So to bring craft and creation together in new ways. And also this was exhibited at the Architecture Biennale in 2012, where some of you may have seen the image I'm showing here. When we look at these images of exhibitions now, it seems hard to imagine that we will get that close to people again. So it's an image from September. So the exhibition was up till September 2019 at the Architecture Center in Vienna. So just to give you an idea what it looked like when it was installed in terms of an architectural exhibition. It made use of photographs, plans, some models, lots of text that provided information not only about the architectural project that was being discussed, but also about economy, ecology, labor, and the context in which the project was being found. This is the book we did that brings together all the 21 case studies and writings by practitioners, theorists, care thinkers concerned with architecture, ecology, legacies of coloniality, and finding ways of working differently within the existing conditions. So not necessarily dreaming of a utopian elsewhere, but seeking to make maybe on the large scale of the planetary, very small but hopefully lasting and meaningful contributions. As has become clear, the interest that Angelika and I have is not care as a new style or a typology or another measurement of evaluation, but about a perspective in architecture. So the architects we exhibited, we all talked with them that we are exhibiting them under this umbrella of care, but it's not something they had previously said about their own work. But all the different practices could very much relate to our analysis, that what they do can be taken as examples for care practices through architecture. Starting with the given, I think, is one of the key reorientations, not just within architecture and urbanism, but maybe also in other practices that deal with space and with art making, but which very much is a departure from these modernist legacies that very often ignored the given or pretended that nothing had been there before something arrived, which is of course this extremely colonial perspective on what is there, that is being ignored, silenced, annihilated, rendered inexistent very often. Whereas starting with the given renders us accountable to what is already there. So in the seminar, we talked, of course, a lot about responsibility, which is one of these echoes that care comes with. And starting with the given means that there is an accountability toward the given, and how we relate to that will then be reflected back to us as producers in what we have done. As I said before, it's about the interdependence between economy, ecology, and labor. So in a way, a holistic approach. So not to privilege one over the other, and also to look at these conditions of economy, ecology, and labor more closely. And there are many initiatives in architecture now that look at labor conditions, but also this new initiative of a moratorium on construction. So there are many things going on around this. And maybe paradoxically, I would like to end with what it means to think about repairing the future. So in a way, to understand that there is no better future, most likely, but to have a more humble approach, that the future will always be in need of repair. And that repair is not rendering something impeccable or making the wounds disappear, but that repairing is in a way understanding that living with the broken requires us to think about ways of long-term caretaking and mending. Modern architecture very much was premised on the promise of building a better future. And I would say today we are at a point where we have arrived at thinking about the future in terms of repair. And with this, I will stop the screen share, and I'm looking forward to discussing, exchanging, and continuing to think about the challenges, the contradictions, the problematics, and the entanglements around care, architecture, space, urbanism, and the built environment.
Thank you very much, Elke, for sharing all these case studies, your research and your reflections. And I think that it echoes so much with the deep felt desire of many of thinking of ways how to continue.